This entire concept of global jihad can be traced back to one of the most important thinkers when we think of jihadist ideologies, and whose name is Abdullah Azam. And Pakistan's tribal areas comes into perspective of what later the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and once again, what we call Taliban 2.0. Afghanistan now slowly and gradually, under Abdullah Azam's ideological pattern, it would have required to expand, and slowly and gradually most of these countries would be toppled in terms of their regimes, which is basically to take back the model and implement it in different places in accordance to what the original idea. So usually people ask a question in terms of where the concept of an Islamic Emirates actually came from. It's interesting because the background does not immediately refer to what happened in the 90s. Rather, we'll have to go back to 1978 and 1984. This entire concept of global jihad can be traced back to one of the most important thinkers when we think of jihadist ideologies, and whose name is Abdullah Azam. And Abdullah Azam was basically a Palestinian and then exiled into Jordan, and then exiled from there into Saudi Arabia. And he was one of the proponents who actually invited Osama bin Laden into Afghanistan. Abdullah Azam basically in 1984 wrote one of the most formative texts in terms of what the future of governance systems would be. And at that time, there was no Al-Qaeda, there was no Taliban. It was just the Mujahideen that were fighting Russian invasion in Afghanistan. But he realized that an importance of an ideology and what concepts would be created would actually materialize at some point in the future. So Abdullah Azam first thought that the most important part is not to actually for Muslims to capture more land, but to actually first review and renew their pledge to an Islamic system by toppling governments across the Muslim world and forming a new Sharia compliant system within it. And so when he talks about global jihad, obviously he was a Palestinian, and he has continuously written that his first love was for the freedom of Palestine. But then he cites certain texts as well as his own experience in terms of what he thinks is important right now. And that's where actually this entire concept of Afghanistan and Pakistan's tribal areas comes into perspective of what later the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and once again, what we call Taliban 2.0 actually refer to when they keep on talking that the Durand line is not a permanent border, and Pakistan's tribal areas, they would like to be stakeholders. Abdullah Azam actually said that for any concept of global jihad, it was not possible that it could actually be flared from Palestine, because the terrain and geography did not offer the kind of terrain that Afghanistan and the tribal areas offer. Because he said that if any kind of war is to escalate, it will have to be a guerrilla warfare, and for which the areas surrounding the Arabian Peninsula as well as the Middle Eastern parts were not good enough, because they did not have the kind of mountains for that the fighters could hide in. And then secondly, he also thought that most of the Middle Eastern and Arabian governments, according to him, were influenced by the West and would not allow such a movement to take place. And so before Al-Qaeda was formed, Abdullah Azam actually wrote this text to say that it would be Afghanistan and the bordering areas of Pakistan, which were the tribal areas. And he said that firstly it was strategically important because it would actually have the kind of influence for a fighter to sort of hide in different places, and he could actually carry out a long-term guerrilla warfare. And then the second most important part was because he thought that these areas were autonomous, and particularly reference to Pakistan's tribal areas. He said that these people have not been under a governance system, and even they are part of Pakistan and in history some point been part of Afghanistan as well. These people have not taken any governance system into consideration and are rarely influenced. Secondly, they have a code during which according to which they would actually like to keep foreigners with themselves as guests and would never compromise them. And it was actually this concept that later, we saw Al-Qaeda forming up bases in Pakistan's tribal areas and Afghanistan simultaneously. And then we see an era of 2001, large-scale operations being conducted by the Pakistan military because its own writ was being compromised in the tribal areas. And then once the FATA merger has taken place, this consistent demand again from the TTP during their peace talks to say that they need to abolish what the tribal areas status is, because it should retain its autonomous status. And once again, we see that during this escalation between Pakistan and Afghanistan, the demand comes in that the Durand line is not a permanent border, and the tribal areas, the Afghans have consistently keep on saying that you should sit and talk with the Taliban, who again redemand that this area should be given to them as an autonomous area where they can roam around freely. So this entire concept of an Emirates that's slowly and gradually spreading stems from that particular part. And this was a point in the 1990s when the Soviets retreated as well, that what should be the best system that should be implemented in Afghanistan. And so ulama, both from the Salafist part, from the Hanafist parts, and from different parts of schools of thought, that actually sat down together, and ultimately they realized that, in accordance to what the Islamic Sharia states, a caliphate would require a general consensus amongst the Muslims to recognize what the concept of a caliphate is. And that's why they actually demanded that they should be in Emirates, and an Emirates would actually lay the foundation and it would multiply. It would not remain static. So if it's Afghanistan for now, slowly and gradually, under Abdullah Azam's ideological pattern, it would have required to expand, and slowly and gradually most of these countries would be toppled in terms of their regimes, and Emirates would be set up in. And we see the similar patterns this time even when the Taliban actually came into power. They announced openly that Muslims from all over the world should actually come and see how an emirate functions, which is basically to take back the model and implement it in different places in accordance to what the original idea was.